What?
I'm sure there's a logical
Those
explanation
badges are
why
tough
you'd have
stock.
why you'd have a
Wow.
1-year-old on your back when you're using an edger, but I'm sure there'll be plenty of time to
I
do
mean,
it.
I don't think of it as a particularly kickback
I don't know what
related
he
tool.
did. I don't know if he fell over.
Like, was it a
Like, is that
gas-powered edger?
I don't
Like,
know. I don't know. This literally came in probably, let's see, what time was this?
I don't
Less than
know.
an hour ago, and I just noticed it. So she sent it at 5:11. So I think he's just they're determining whether he needs stitches right now. Oh, we're being live streamed.
We're being live streamed, yeah.
I'll be more professional. Okay.
You're
How's
already
Tom's?
the most professional one here, so I wouldn't worry about it too much.
When does
Hey,
Tom get a new hip?
not yet. It'll be 2 weeks from Thursday, actually. Which I was going to ask you. Do you suppose next week can we do 2 chapters and then we can do our last chapter before John? Is that going to work for you, John? Will we be able to get our last chapter in before you go on your
Think that
European
works? Let me
vacation?
make sure real quick.
You don't want to create a summer cliffhanger?
Or we could leave the cliffhanger.
Ooh.
We're not good at the hiatus return though.
Right. June 10th is good. June 17th is good because we're not leaving till the 18th. And then 24th is bad, but July 1st would also work if we wanted to do that.
I don't know. I'm not
That's
sure what my post.
it's a holiday for Dave.
It is.
I don't know what our post
Dave
surgery.
doesn't do well with holidays and remembering us.
Uh, the last one was Victoria Day.
Mhm.
Oh, right. I
So
don't think
what
I.
precipitated Tom's need for a new hip?
Well, he's already had one. He's got pretty significant arthritis
Mm.
in general. So he did really well with the first one, like really, really well. And then right away, the second one. I guess that's really common. Um, the other hip, like in layman's term, the way that they describe it, the other hip can't keep up because the other one's like super strong.
How does the new one feel?
Excellent. Excellent. So we're hoping that the second one will be the same.
Yay, technology.
Right?
It's pretty amazing.
I
It's
don't know
not
what
even,
learning is, but they've learned how to replace a hip.
you know, and they don't, it's not a general anesthetic, it's an epidural. And he walks out of the hospital the next day.
That's crazy.
It is
Yeah.
crazy. Yep. And it's all robotic. So whatever that means. It sounds impressive. I don't actually know. I've tried to look at images and it's like, there's a reason I was a teacher and not a medical person.
All right. Are we ready to roll?
Mm-hmm. Are you ready to do your introduction?
I am. I prepped. Hello, happy June, and welcome to EdTech Talk's continuing discussion of Dave Cormier's new book, Learning in a Time of Abundance. This week, chapter 4. It's a doozy. This is at least partially an education problem, where Dave takes us into the formative versus summative assessment of pasta sauce, tells us that learning is not always a good thing, asks 5 questions in a row, and then thanks himself for asking. I give him a quantifiable 11 out of 10 for bringing us to the brink of giving up in this world of abundance. But then in the last chapter, he throws us a lifeline and says we have a fighting chance. So buckle up, stay tuned for one heck of a chapter as we begin the second half of Learning in a Time of Abundance. This is Jeff Lebo in Busan, Korea.
This is Jennifer Madrill in Laval, Wisconsin.
This is John Schinker in Stowe, Ohio.
And Dave Cormier in Windsor, Ontario, Canada.
Wow,
I
that
hear
will teach
marketing is really
me.
important in this new world, so I'm trying to really sell it,
That will teach me. I will never again ask you, are you ready to do the introduction?
No, I think
You've proven
that was a thing of beauty. That was.
it was.
I was on the edge of my seat and I wrote it. What happens next?
Oh man.
And
Anyone
as
want
usual, fortunately, Jen has prepared an awesome set of questions.
well, I don't know. After that, I'm really, really nervous. But before I launched in, I was just going to ask if anyone else had any like segue that could beat what Jeff said, or even if you just want to like have a segue that you know is not
Well,
going to be as good
I do just want to point out that if people do check the posts for this at edtechtalk.com, they can find show notes, including some information about solar panels. Our poor author was having some issues
Ooh.
finding that information, so I led him to the water. I didn't drink it for him, but might be some useful resources.
What's the answer, Jeff? Should he get solar panels or not?
Oh,
Uh,
check this out.
in the short term, no. If he's going to have them for more than 15, 20 years, it'll more than break even a little bit.
Dave, when was the last time you lived in a house for more than 15 or 20 years?
When I was a child, the one I grew up in.
So
Yeah.
Teresa should get solar panels.
But you see, that's only a question of whether or not I'm buying them for financial reasons, which is not the
Thank
reason I
you.
want
I
solar
was
panels.
just going to say the same thing. What if he has
It's just
different
my
motivation?
motivation, my values are different than that, Jeff.
Well, then just do
You're
it.
leading me down the garden path here.
Then save the blah, blah, blah. If you want to save the earth, save the earth.
Let's remember this as an example when we talk about values shortly in our
Oh,
Jeff is
conversation.
playing the role of
You're-
ChatGPT today. Well,
You're
if you want solar
foreshadowing
panels,
chapter
buy the
6
stupid
right
solar
now.
panels. Come on, David.
Oh, Jeff, we are going to jump all
Uh,
over your answer in about 20 minutes.
As usual, I am concerned.
Although that did sound kind of negative for you, Jeff. I thought you'd be more upbeat about his solar panel purchase.
Yeah.
But, okay. So, all right, let's jump right in. So I have, for those that are on the call, you can see my questions here and you're probably cringing. We've had many a conversation over the years defining what learning is and comparing and contrasting that to what happens in the education system. But I think it's, and Dave, I will not make you try to define learning. It was very prominently discussed in your chapter that those can be really long and drawn out conversations without a lot of conclusion. But can you help us understand in the way, help us frame for the discussion to follow in the chapter, the difference between learning and education?
Sure. I think it's wise of you not to let me try to define learning. I think you've clearly known me a long time and know when not to play into my worser tendencies.
Just going to get a
So
lot of questions.
so simply put, learning is this thing that humans do when they change. And education is the system that we've built as our different cultures to try to shove a certain kind of learning onto our population.
And how does
One
that
of them,
contrast? Oh, sorry, were you done or were you?
so one of them's the system,
Yeah.
the other one's the thing that happens to a person. So I can learn that I'm not rewarded for doing a good job, for instance. But there's no education system that teaches that. Right. We teach with the way our systems are designed, we have like objectives and we have clear things, and we have these paths of things we want to do. Whereas a student learning, sitting in the classroom, learns all kinds of things. They learn that they can distract the teacher and not have to work that day. They learn learning is something that is constantly happening. And we have this system that tries to teach a very narrow piece of thing, which students may or may not learn. They sometimes learn the opposite of what we're teaching, what the education system is interested in.
So I have as my next question, I'm going to ask it now, but you don't have to answer it. So, but to me, the kind of rest of the conversation hopefully then becomes framed around this idea of what are the implications of the differences then between learning and education. Because a lot of times they're commingled. In fact, I pulled up a definition of education that actually had learning in the definition. So it was a structured process of teaching and learning in institutions. So it kind of becomes a tad bit circular when we're saying, you know, they're different, yet learning is part of the definition of education. So we'll kind of keep this, let's just keep this as a floating thing off to the side, as we typically do when we talk about learning and education. But how does it, first of all, how does it sit with John and Jeff? Are you guys okay if we do this? Like, kind of like Dave did in the chapter, that we aren't going to try to put nice little neat bows around a definition of learning and education?
I think if you try to define learning, we'll just be here forever. That
You could write a book about it.
you could. No one would read it, but you could write one. And I see yeah, I like education as a system. I sometimes talk about credentialing as separate from learning, and that's kind of a similar idea. And one of the struggles that I've had is I separated those two things, and so I then lost interest in credentialing entirely. So I stopped, that's why I don't have a doctorate, because I see that as hoop jumping and not necessarily tied to learning useful things, which I got from the three of you more than anybody else.
You concur, Dr. Jen?
Yeah, it was a thing to do.
She was well on her way to finishing before she encountered the miscreants on this call. So I think she had to finish it by that point.
I did have a follow-up for Dave. At one point in your definition of education, you talked about the things we force them to learn or something like that.
Mhm.
Who is we?
In our cultures, the ones that we grew up in North America, it comes out of a mixture of tradition and our education, our departments of education. But having worked inside of one of those, it's super funny how these things come together. You end up with I personally work with some amazing educators inside the system who had very specific things they wanted kids to learn. And then they worked very, very hard for 3 years to develop a curriculum that would very specifically teach that in a 150-page document that probably no one ever read. And then what you get is a trickle down from that, right? Where by the time you hit the education system, you might get a textbook. A lot of these courses are assigned at the last minute. People don't have an idea of they're going to teach them whatever else they go in. And then they basically replicate tradition. So there's the plan, but by the time it gets to the classroom, a lot of what a teacher ends up doing is what was done to them. So there's this mixture of what's going on now, whatever materials happen to be nearby, and then this sort of long arm of tradition that we replicate whenever we go ahead and teach. And so that that's the system, right? Like when I say education system, I don't just mean the people who are locked in an office somewhere designing curriculum, because for the most part, nobody actually reads their stuff. But rather the way that all of this stuff comes together, like the way we get locked in. So one of the things in that chapter is about the Harvard Business Review 10,000 hours thing. So I guess it's 10 years or so ago, maybe 15 now. Everything is so much longer ago than I think now. Every time I go and check, how long ago was that? Oh, that was 20 years ago. Oh, shit. Um, it said that directed focus practice, or whatever the term is, of 10,000 hours is what makes expertise. And when you really look at the claim they're making a slightly lighter claim than the one that was pulled out by some popular authors. But at least 10,000 hours gets you accustomed to something, right? And we all have this sort of amazing, well, those of us who ever get to the point of teaching certainly have made it through those 12 years of school and have this habituation, right? This built-in, deep down understanding of what it means to be in a classroom. And most of that is terrible. I remember again going through it with my kids, like how many hours they spend just sitting there doing nothing. But we're habituated to it. There's an expectation that we should, right? And we're habituated to the practices of it, whether it be uh, worksheets or like whatever that practice is, repetition, all this stuff. We're accustomed to it, so it's okay, regardless of how dehumanizing it might be.
So the education system is largely cultural tradition.
I think so, yeah. Yeah,
it's
mostly.
a very cumulative we.
I definitely a cumulative we. Yeah,
And
I don't think
definitely not going to fit into a 60-second clip, but that's okay.
No.
That's so bad. It's funny. That we is, I am an anti-conspiracy theorist in so many ways. I don't think anybody can control these systems. They're gigantic, and you can push it all you want. It's just going to stay right where it is.
Conspiracies sort of imply a level of organization that doesn't seem to apply.
There's no way. There's no way. Every time anyone's like, "You're brainwashing the kids." Are you? Have you ever tried to brainwash a kid?
This is such a segue for our next section.
This is not what we would be filling their heads with if we actually had the organization and power to control their minds.
They'd be so much nicer to each other.
So this is very much on point and topic for your chapter where much of it is covering this bureaucratic nature of the system and the resistance to change and all the things that are baked in and kind of prevent that change from happening. So, certainly we hear, and we've talked a lot about over the years, pushes for educational reform and everything is going to be the great disruptor. And yet at the same time, there's this resistance to either radical or in some cases any changes in education. And so I put an example in our notes today, is cursive. I just love the one when the cursive comes up. Like we have to keep teaching that cursive, for maybe, I don't know.
You know what's happening again here in Ontario, right? Grade
No.
4. It's been brought back in. It's been put back in the curriculum for this fall.
Yeah. There are lots of movements to do that. And that's back to the tradition thing is I saw a curriculum director once talk to the Board of Education and they were talking about math and the way we teach math and a parent was speaking at the meeting and complaining about, how we're teaching students to be problem solvers instead of just procedural, here's how you do this, here's how you solve this kind of problem, here's how you do this computation. And the curriculum director looked at the parent and said, why do you want your children to hate math as much as you did?
What'd they say?
Just like the parent was speechless and sat down. It was, I need you to learn how to do, square roots by hand because I had to learn that. Well, we don't need to do that. Every time you try to take something off the list, people get really upset about that. And cursive is a great example of that.
Oh yeah, Common Core. I mean, new math. I mean, those are all oh my God.
The cursive example is a good one. There's a bunch of people who have a lot of research on it, but evidence that suggests that students who do stuff in cursive when they're younger pay more attention to their work, and have longer staying power. They're more resilient, they're more relentless in terms of their approach to problem solving. I'm not sure that isn't true. I just don't think it has anything to do with writing in cursive. I don't think there's some magical connection between swirly lines and your ability to stay on task. I think there's a connection between anything that's hard, and learning how to do a hard thing. And I don't care if I've seen people become different people learning how to shovel a ditch, because they're learning how to do a hard thing and learning to persist in a hard thing. I think that's really important.
And I think there is this whole undercurrent of if they don't do what I learn or don't learn what I learned, they won't be prepared for life because
That's right.
this prepared me. And so now they're not going to be prepared. This whole generation will be.
Obviously, I'm prepared.
They're going to fail at
Therefore,
Jeopardy.
everything I did is part of the preparation.
So okay, we've got all this resistance baked in here. Yet, as we talked about last week, and you kind of alluded to a moment ago, most in the education system have limited agency really to do anything.
Yep.
We talked a lot last week or a couple of weeks in a row about in higher education filled with adjuncts. There's only a certain amount you can really do to tweak and change things.
Yep.
So anything you want to be, we've already talked about some of the consequences of this resistance in terms of education and learning, but anything else that you really want to highlight in terms of consequences of this kind of the butting of heads between kind of the need to change or the talk of change all the time, yet the resistance within the system and then the lack of agency?
I think the biggest consequence is that mid-career teachers stop trying to be innovators. I think that's the one that it's been on my list of things to track down for years. But anecdotally, that point at which a teacher has been in there for long enough that they remember the last time you tried a thing. Whatever that number is, 10, 12 years, maybe it's 15, maybe it's 8, just depending on like how engaged, how involved they are. When they start being able to say, yeah, no, we've tried that before. Once that comes in, I think that's the piece where you lose your best professionals often, like the ones who have the perfect combination of like currently engaged and whatever else. And not to be ageist, because I think there's lots of different places where people are good in their career, but I find that group particularly suffer from a lack of connection between things people try to do and the results they get.
You've said a lot of smart things over the years, but honestly, that just gave me the biggest aha kind of chill because I'm kind of facing that with AI in teaching. It's like, do I want to go to battle over this? Like, I'm just tired. Like, I don't know if I can. I know what it's like to try to change things within a system, and is this something I even want to try? Because it's exhausting, and you're just going to get beaten down, which I think is kind of aligned with what you're saying in some ways as well.
Can the priorities of learning and can the methods of teaching ever really change unless the ultimate assessment changes? Like, if the goal is still to get a good score on this kind of test or to do well on the standardized tests, doesn't everything sort of flow to that? And unless that changes significantly, what's the point?
Did you read my next question? It was, how does this resistance to change perpetuate what Dave terms the game of school?
See, you say it so much more academically.
Man, I think that's very much aligned. Yeah, go for it. What he said.
I don't know if you're asking me that question.
Yeah.
But I think assessment, like all these things, we're into a wicked problem, right? So every time you look at one piece of the puzzle, you push another one out of the way. And this is why educational reform never works. Or part of the reason why is that, let's say you do phonics, because the struggle you're seeing is that kids can't read, right? And so what you're saying is that if you combine letters and combine structures and get them doing it in that way, they can actually make the sounds when they read. And the idea being that if it's more comfortable for you to read, then you're going to be more willing to read. You're going to do it more often. There'll be better outcomes for reading. Problem is that's not what everyone's is. Some people just don't want to read. Some people get headaches when they read. Some people are bored by the material they're given. Some people are too young or too old, or some people just don't like to conform. People have different LDs. There's all kinds of cross sections here. Some of the teachers just suck. I mean, there's all kinds of pieces, but whenever you take one solution and try to use it to clear everything out, you end up breaking a whole bunch of other things. So assessment's a good example. So I've had any number of curriculum coordinator, particularly at the K-12 level in my career, say, if you don't put a grade on that, nobody's going to do the work. And the teachers are not going to teach it because they'll never be able to fit into their program. They'll never be able to rationalize getting it fit in. Right?
And
That's
the students won't take it seriously either.
Because their understanding of take it seriously is that there's a grade on it.
Right. It's the game of school, right?
It's the game of school.
Mm-hmm.
But so in the transition, if you decide that you're not going to grade something, then they don't understand what they're supposed to focus on. And so things go.
Are we equating grading and assessing?
I
Oh,
was
I
speaking
was
broadly.
when you said that. You meant something different. Yeah, go for it. What did you
I
mean?
thought we were talking about evaluation,
I
the
was
putting a
thinking,
grade on a thing.
Well, I mean, like taking phonics. Okay, maybe some people don't like to read, but most people learn to read, and phonics can be a useful step along that way. And it's demonstrable whether someone can read or not. I don't have to give them a number, but okay, mission accomplished. They can read.
Because the mission's not learn to read. The mission is like to read.
No, not my mission. I want them to be able to read. I don't care. Like,
You don't care if they like it or not.
not in first grade. No, I just want them to be able to read. Or, that's part of the mission.
But if you want to accomplish that in first grade, the best way to do it is to get them to like to read.
Okay. I'm on board with that.
And we, as kids get older, we tend to decouple the motivation and we lean more on the extrinsic motivation, which is where the grades come in. I'm going to do this because I need to do these 7 things to get the grade that I want. And that's where the motivation comes from. If they are intrinsically motivated because they're interested in learning the thing, because they want to do the thing, then the grades become less relevant to getting them to do it. And that's where it becomes more useful as a measurement.
And I feel
you
like
can measure
kids
the
have
thing.
an intrinsic motivation just to learn. There's a lot of those.
Yeah, we work really hard to beat that out of them.
Yeah, like that's the system's problem. And, maybe too much of it is forcing them to learn things they don't want to learn. But I think most
Like
kids
phonics.
want to be literate. You're
We're going back
anti-phonics?
around here. So like forcing them to do things they don't want to. Phonics is not fun. Phonics is repetitive. I mean, unless you like the chanty, shouty, outy business, which can be fun with a really good teacher.
And
But
a
it's
lot of
not
first graders do.
And then what happens if they're not good at phonics? we pull them out of
alternative
music
methods
so
need
they
to
can
be
do more
engaged.
phonics because they need to pass the test. We give them more of the stuff that they're not good at, and that makes them like school less.
Okay, but like that's the kind of changes that needs to happen in the system is that, okay, here's a method that works for some, but not all. And the human role in this is saying, oh, phonics isn't working for Johnny. Let's give him this alternative method, or let's play a physical game that helps him learn to read or something. Like
Which
that's
is what the top 20% of teachers have been doing since the dawn of time. The problem is the middle 60. So there's a bottom 20, let's not even discuss them, but the middle 60. So they only have two approaches or one approach to teaching. So they don't have like a toolkit of 70 different ways, and we have no way of training them. Right? There's no
we have
way to
ways of getting rid
train.
of them, replacing them with AI.
You could do that.
I think
wouldn't.
AI could be really effective for helping kids to learn to read in the way that they want. Crickets. Okay, thanks for watching.
Well, actually, Jeff, I mean, you kind of help people do this. Like, describe that. Describe it, like how you see that working.
AI, I
Yeah.
think in terms of instruction, game over for humans. I think we should be asking, what is the
Well,
human
what
role
are
in
we here
education?
for? We should
For the social component of learning, for the interventions. But in terms of, sitting a kid down with his AI tutor who says, "Hey, Johnny, how you doing?" and adapts to that kid about how they want to engage with material, and is constantly like, "Okay, here are what we want to learn this week, and what are you in the mood for right now?" And
You watched
develops a
any
sense for their.
sci-fi movies in the last 100 years? Like
Have
this
you
is where
used
we
AI
all
this
go to
week?
die. Like the thing you described is the most terrifying thing in the world to me.
Oh, I
Like
think it's happening this year, next year. It's happening.
I know. I just couldn't agree more.
Why is it
Uh,
terrifying though?
because it's the Psalm Khan like version of education. Like all we need to do is sit a kid down. They're totally socially adjusted to this. They're totally fine. Every kid is trying to find an answer to a question, and all the questions make sense. So like the this whole chapter is about how the education system only works if we already know what all the questions are, and we already know what all the answers are we want them to have.
You're saying that's how it works now.
That's
You're
how it
saying it
works now.
only
And your
works.
version works under that model. But that's the version. So there's two models of education that have been running side by side since at least the 12th century. We have the scholastics and we have the humanists, right? So we have those people who believe that there are truths and our job is to teach people those truths. And there are people who believe that the humanists who believe that learning is something that you come and become and discover, and it's not a bunch of single things that you want to accumulate. You can say constructivism and objectivism, however you want to separate it. We've been doing the same thing over and over again. Education system has a mixture of both right now, right? It has a mixture of bits and pieces of both. So what I just described as a good teacher is the humanist. That was the person they've got all these different ways of thinking about things. They're looking at each kid individually, and they're sort of mapping out how they're going to try to help each of those kids through it. Those kids are all going to succeed in different ways. Success is going to mean something different to each of those kids, and a good teacher is going to be able to get a sense of tracking what that's going to be.
A good teacher is not going to be able to do that the way AI is going to be doing it. And I said AI is really good for instruction. I didn't say learning. I think humans still have an important role to play in learning, social learning, values learning. But in terms of instruction, AI is going to be able to sense there are certain things that we can accept as facts or as being literate, or that 1 + 1 = 2. And AI can, I think,
Give us an example that's deeper than 1 + 1 = 2.
2 + 2 = 4.
Give you a
The
lot
chemistry and I mean all the sciences. Um, History is much more subjective and humanistic. Uh, and I think the humans would, play a role in the social part of that. All right, here's some information. Engage with this information. Go to your virtual reality, talk to George Washington or whatever, and then let's come back and discuss this and what was going on. And like that, I'm not saying there's no role for humans. I'm saying in the acquisition of knowledge, information, the customized real-time feedback that AI can provide and the customization, humans cannot compete.
But in all of those cases, we're just assuming we know what George Washington was like. Like,
But we can present the multitude, whatever, however a human could present the multitude, AI can present the multitude of George Washingtons. There's nothing AI can do that humans can do better in that regard.
yeah, you can have judgment. That's what AI doesn't have. It has no judgment.
But we can, I mean, we're not just letting
Take
them
the George
free to
Washington
ChatGPT.
one.
We prepare a textbook, right? Like that has certain constraints. The AI, the educational AI tutor would have those same human constructed constraints.
So what you're saying is AI is a better textbook.
Yeah.
Is that what you mean by instruction?
You know, textbook is, I think, a limiting metaphor, but instructional tool.
AI is better at delivering content to students in doses
Delivering,
that they can
interacting, assessing, analyzing, providing feedback.
Okay, can I? Okay,
I told
I
you it was
think
going to be a doozy.
this is a doozy. Okay, in my notes, separate from the notes that you guys are all looking at, I had put in this idea, the distinction between remembering, acquiring knowledge versus exploration, creativity. And so, like, the first isn't, that's more with recall. It's easier to measure. It's easier to assess. It's and Jeff, you had your 1+1, but we can come up with other things. But to me, that's the distinction. Like maybe there's differences in subject matter or things that maybe one is AI is going to be more helpful with. But I don't know, Jeff, to say it across the board, all subjects, all topics.
I didn't say all subjects, all topics. I said a lot of subjects. I didn't say it, but what I mean is a lot of subjects, a lot of topics, certainly for language learning. Like for language learning, there's so many benefits, whether it's pronunciation or grammar or listening comprehension. There's so much practice and learning that can go on there. And then you can have interaction, real life interaction. That's exciting. Or you can go to the virtual environment and interact there as well.
And I think you said something, and Jeff or Dave covers it too, the difference between formative and summative assessment piece too. Like a lot of what you're talking about is like the practice and the formative and like catching little mistakes as they occur or whatever. It's faster to be able to do it on an individualized basis versus when I learned math in class of 25 students. Who knew the teacher had any idea if Jennifer in the back row could do the algebra problem or whatever. And I think your point is AI will help us on those types of things, right?
Yeah, lots of things.
Yeah, I can sign on to that.
I'm sorry, I'm still on Team Human. I'm just saying.
Yeah, I feel out of sorts because you seem like you're not on Team Human. I don't know how to respond. Yeah. Were you done, Dave? Or were you thinking?
I still think that I think I'm willing to agree with Jeff that there are many scholastic style, like objectivist types tasks that you can go through reasonably well there. The language learning for sure, definitely. Like I haven't spent as long doing it as Jeff has, but I certainly spent a long time in that business. Definitely. Because it does exactly what it is. The challenge that I have is that these systems were designed with right answers in mind. All of the designing for these things for 60 years has been about problem solving, about finding right answers. I think of that as detrimental to the culture to teach with right answers, where people are trying to find the right answer and getting to know and acquiring knowledge in that way. I think it's problematic generally. And I think that there's a lot of mixed in human stuff that gets brought into the way that we teach, a lot of learning that happens that's not part of the education system. Some of that's really bad. So, for instance, I have a kid whose teacher constantly talks about how our government is terrible and has a whole sequence of extra learning bits that she includes that are probably not great. But I think there's a lot of nuance that happens inside of a classroom, a good classroom, that gets lost inside of these systems. And I'm here to defend that nuance, regardless of whether or not we're talking about the sciences. Or, so here we go. It's a book. I just got it in the last couple of days. It talks about how the way that we've taught problem solving in medicine, for instance, is really problematic for doctors because when they are faced with not knowing what the right answer is, they think that it's because they haven't found the right answer yet. And they think it's a deficiency in themselves. And often there is no answer to the problem that they're dealing with, or there's such a huge complexity of answers, but it creates this really weird sort of expectation that any question has an answer. And that makes them bad doctors, because the biggest part of a doctor in most cases, unless you're a surgeon or somebody who deals with people who can't talk back, the biggest issue is trying to work with your patients. And a lot of that right answer business actually impedes that. So the way that you take in the information actually matters. The fact that you use AI to learn the names of all the drugs actually impacts the way you think about them.
But that doesn't mean there's never a right answer, right? I mean,
Like ever but anything ever?
well, there
No,
are
no,
lots
it
of
doesn't
things
mean.
that are very well defined. I mean, how does a plant convert sunlight into energy? There's a right answer for that.
There's an approximation
So,
that we currently use. But if you want to get fussy about it, like all of those things that we teach people are like approximations of what's actually happening. There's only so much of it we understand.
But like, you don't think AI or virtual reality would be useful for a doctor in doing diagnostic role play? Presenting,
It's a
okay, here the
nightmare. I couldn't imagine a scenario that I would like less. I've actually organized those workshops for med students at the school, and it's the awkwardness that is the most important part of the process, the awkwardness of the patients. So we hired, I guess, when I worked there, uh, hundreds of standardized patients who come in, and we teach them what their medical issue is, but the real point of it has nothing to do with the medical issue. They're given sort of be awkward today, or be reticent, or or just whatever, and that's the whole part of the diagnosis. All of that training is about dealing with people. It's all about the human.
okay, I totally agree. Like, the human social interaction part should be more important in medical schools. I'm talking about a doctor's diagnostic skills, presenting them, putting on their virtual reality goggle, or it doesn't have to be virtual reality, but here's a patient presenting with these symptoms. What are your tests? How are you going to approach this? And it could be based on a real life case and database of cases. Like, that's a useful way for them to practice diagnosing things, don't you think?
Well, and it maybe. I think it could be part of the puzzle. Certainly, this book argues that that's a problem. Um, she talks about the few medical schools where they teach gray cases, which are cases that don't have answers, and how that has had a huge impact on the doctors that come out of those programs, because they're a little bit more ready for real life. The problem with a system that presents you a bunch of cases that have answers is that it teaches you that there are answers to cases.
It, in 90% of the cases with patients who presented this is what it was, but 2% was that, and 3% was this, and like all that data's there. Like,
Yeah,
it's
but
not
even
saying this
define,
is the right answer.
you're only ever getting a couple of the things that are actually present, right? Like no matter how many tests you do or whatever else, like you're not. We had the same conversation like 3 weeks ago, where you have a fundamental idea that as long as we get enough information in the system, it's going to make the right answers. Like it's the problem is a lack of enough decision-making power, enough. And the more we put in there, the better and the more closer it's going to be to perfect. And to me, those extra bits of information don't help.
I'm just saying the ability for an individual to interact with this huge set of data
Mhm.
can be more useful than one professor in front of a classroom full of doctors saying, okay, Mrs. Jones presented with this symptom and that symptom. What do you think? What do you think? What do you think? There's still a role for that, but I think for the individual practice, just like for Johnny learning to read, I think that the current technology is pretty awesome and
I
useful.
disagree. In those sessions, if you talk to like med students coming out of those sessions, the first time they do those, they're blown away, not by the content of it, but by what it means to take up a doctor's position. Because that's really what they're learning. They're learning the social modality that's, at least thought of
But
to be
like they're
necessary.
interacting with real humans, right?
Yeah, but doctors, they did
Yeah.
exactly
So,
what you just described. The patient, that thing.
but they did it with humans as opposed to their unlimited practice of virtual reality. I feel like we're just repeating ourselves, so we can move on. I did want to mention one thing, because I feel like in this chapter you talk a lot about how like forever education has been, built on teaching them the right answer, and this is the right answer.
One half of it,
And
yeah.
yeah, and what occurred to me is, Jen mentioned her aha moment earlier, and I've always said a teacher's favorite sound is ah, that
That's
moment
true.
a student
Yeah, yeah,
realizes something. And that
totally.
is not fact-based. That's based on, when a connection happens or when they figure out how to do something. So like
Mhm.
that's been present in education forever as well, right?
Yeah, for sure.
So it's not all doom and gloom and right answers.
It is not. I
Just,
agree.
I have no segue for that though, Jeff. I got nothing on that one. But I do have a segue for what you guys were just talking about that actually ties into what we talked about at the very start of the thing. So my question actually originally was talking about values as they are embedded in our current education system. But I
Mhm.
think this conversation is leading down the path going, our education system, we might not really quite understand what it is. Like if we had the same question and answer 18 months from now, it would probably be even more AI focused as it is right now. And so this
Mhm.
idea of values. And so, where you talked a moment ago, we're kind of pigeonholing Jeff, saying if you give the beast enough information, it's going to keep pushing out better and better information. But within that, there are these, kind of value judgments. For example, like your first question tonight was like, should I or should I not buy solar panels? And he made a determination based on a set of an understanding of what your values were and what was important to you. And I don't know where, Jeff, in your AI simulation that you were putting together, climate change came into, you want to be a good human on this planet that, we're slowly destroying, those types of things, which then become the values that are embedded in the system. So again, I'm trying not to make this whole conversation about AI, but I think it does tie into certainly when we think about it as an education system. So Dave, you want to kind of riff on that a little bit, this idea of the values and how those are embedded in the system, and again, how this can help us overcome resistance to change and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that keeps coming up for me is the sense that students think that someone somewhere knows the answer to the question. And that being smart is having access to those answers, right? And that is what they're rewarded for in their testing. That's something that the dozens and dozens and dozens of kids. And again, I'm only can speak to at this age, I'm only talking about kids here in Canada because I've not worked with groups at 20 years old for a long time in other places. But the kids coming in here are really resistant to uncertainty. They're really resistant to situations where they have to apply their values to a decision, right? Because they've been taught that work is to do the task in the way that it was done, and every kid will look at you and go, just tell me what you want me to do. Just if you would just tell us what it is you'd like me to do, give me a nice strict rubric, and then I can do that nice rubric, then I can hand that back to you. You're gonna be happy, I'm gonna be happy, I can go home, right? That's the sort of the process of learning. And the conversation that we're doing as part of the conference that we're doing in 6 weeks is how for work integrated learning, for instance, has become a real struggle because no matter how much we talk to people about teaching it and no matter how we talk to students about taking it, there's always this resistance because they just want to be told, like, so I've come to this training, just tell me how to do the thing. Like, well, it's a question of judgment. We want you to kind of read this stuff and get a sense for these different contexts. And yeah. Okay. But what am I supposed to do? Right? Because the context doesn't matter. It's just the answer that matters. And I think that is where our system has drifted um, as a system. I mean, does everybody teach that way? No, of course not. There are lots of people who are in there who don't. Um, but increasingly, that's what I hear from people teaching in the system. It's what I hear from people who are coming out of that system and coming into the university system for sure.
Okay, Jeff, I'm going to let you have a crack at the same type of question I just had. Let's focus it on AI in your example of this of the solar panels. So, like,
Well,
there
I
is
want to first push back on the characterization that I'm all about the big data and information.
you are kind of painting
That
yourself
if
as
we get
big
enough big
data.
data
I
and
gotta say.
information, it's about interacting with the information. So in the analysis of solar panels, I did not include environmental concerns or anything. I
So
was
what if
just a
it? Yeah, yeah.
cost analysis.
That's
But then I just added another question. Please provide an analysis of the environmental impact of each option. Now, that's not going to make the decision for me, but it's going to provide me with information. Is it reliable? Is it not? I'm going to check Perplexity also because their citation links work better than ChatGPT's, but like the information is out there. So it's helping me acquire information. How I make that value judgment is still my human decision, unless I want to say, okay, here I care 40% about the environment and 60% about cost. Based on that, what would, uh, so I think AI is a tremendous tool for gathering information and for instruction.
And actually, Jeff, that is what I was thinking as you were talking. That you really are you view it as a tool, and I want to step back a little bit on my critique.
That's okay. I'm bring it on. I'm ready. I'm going to break Omni out soon. I need a defender. Have you guys talked to Omni?
I have
No.
not. Tell us about
Why should I when Omni can?
it.
Do you have an AI that can teach us about this?
Yeah. Hey, Omni, I'm arguing with some friends about the impact of AI on instruction. I think it's going to be very effective in some fields, not all. Which fields do you think AI instruction would be best?
AI instruction can be particularly effective in fields that involve a lot of data analysis, routine tasks, or where personalized learning can make a big difference. For example, in mathematics and the sciences, AI can help tailor lessons to individual students' needs and provide immediate feedback. Language learning is another area where AI can excel, offering personalized practice and interactive exercises. Additionally,
What about the importance of teaching values and making moral decisions? Can AI play any role in that?
teaching values and making moral decisions involve a lot of nuance, empathy, and understanding of complex social contexts, which are areas where AI has limitations. While AI can assist by providing scenarios for discussion and helping to frame debates, the core of teaching values and morals requires human interaction. However, AI can support this process by offering diverse perspectives, encouraging critical thinking, and simulating ethical dilemmas. These tools can
Okay, but who's right, me or Dave?
It sounds like both you and Dave have valid points. You're right that AI can be very effective.
I'm playing the role of Jen. You guys are both right. Feel good point.
It looks like there's a typo in the URL.
Stop putting typos in your URL, Jeff.
Yeah.
John, you've been very quiet. Do you have any thoughts on any of this?
I'm just amused by every conversation goes back to AI.
It does go back to AI.
And AI is really not even in the book. There are 7 references to AI in the book, and 3 of them are in the index.
It's a new kind of abundance, though. It's a quantum leap of abundance.
It is
Different kind of abundance.
It's a different kind
It
of
brings the abundance
thing.
together.
Right.
Well, the stuff that, we could sit here again and make it this whole conversation. You're saying, John, we are anyway, but we were talking a moment ago, and I was thinking about it when we were saying that few people within the system have agency to do anything, but the person who is going to be rolling out the AI has a heck of a lot more agency than any individual teacher might, and so that's kind of for me, it's the scary part.
And I think the rollout, especially in the West, is going to be slower than it certainly could be. But I think if we put Sal Khan in charge of education systems, some really good things
what
would
if
happen.
Elon Musk is in charge of our education system?
That's an excellent point.
Okay, that really brought the conversation to
Mhm.
close.
But I think
Okay, now
Salcon's
we're
doing
off
like some
to-
excellent modeling of like how AI can be effective. Did you see his demo when Omni came out and they showed how like, he does his AI tutoring, but the student can actually use their iPad. And so they can
That doesn't work, by the way. I tried some of the stuff he was showing in his most recent videos. I don't know if it was that exact one, but we tried the exact same things. It doesn't work nearly that well. So
free version,
no,
premium,
yeah.
but it will. Like if it doesn't work yet, it will.
I've been saying that for an
Technically.
awful
I mean,
long
I don't
time.
think that like, we're still in the Alta Vista stage of AI,
Yeah.
like, and we're not even seeing the good stuff yet. So I think
Ask Jeeves is coming
technical,
any
it's not the
minute.
limitation. Yeah.
Newton,
Yeah.
what is it? The one that from that Apple video from 1984?
Apple Newton?
How's that it was? I forget
Oh
now.
no,
That was pre-internet.
the 1984 one was a Macintosh.
Yeah, I forget. There was something. The guy was talking to his display. He was doing his calendar. He was doing all kinds of crazy business. I forget now. It's a classic commercial from a long time ago.
All right, we have 10 minutes left, and we can certainly circle back on some of these other things. But I think hopefully this question will take us a little bit away from AI. But I think you made an interesting point, especially given my interest in research and something that also you mentioned in the chapter it always gnaws at me. We encourage educators all the time to follow evidence-based practices. And your commentary is much of the research we do is so stripped down so we understand the variables we're measuring and how we're manipulating them, but they're so devoid of real world context. You question like how realistic is this to helping us support what we're trying to do. So this was kind of a side, to me anyway, kind of a side thing you covered in the chapter versus some of the other things we talked about. Do you want to take a stab at summarizing what your thoughts were on this and if I did a good job of characterizing it or not?
You definitely did. I mean, I get into a lot of trouble for this one, but particularly the cognitivist literature in education tends to be one, it's very prescriptive. All you need to do are these things, and you'll get to where you want to. But they're measuring for memory, right? And there's a whole conversation around getting stuff into long-term memory and a whole bunch of stuff behind this. And I understand lots of people put a lot of their lives into this. I'm not trying to be disrespectful, but my experience of the classroom, at least, and my end of the educational research community would argue that each of these individual details, devoid of their context, is not representative of what they're like when they're in their context. So and I mean, the problem is always to me is things like sports metaphors or chess metaphors or whatever. So we compare things like learning to things that are games because games have ways of winning. And we assume that as long as we put markers on stuff, then we can measure it later. And that means we're winning, regardless of whether the thing that we're winning actually has any relationship to what we want. Right. So in a game, we both agree what winning looks like. I kike le but, and I put 3 in your net, and you put 4 in my net, and you win. And we agreed that putting balls in nets is what winning looks like. In learning, we have to agree what winning is. And this is where the game of school comes in and whatever else. We agree that winning is getting a higher grade, right? So some people argue that that's improved reading ability, let's say. And so we do a test. They read 2 paragraphs, and then we take them away from the text and we ask them a bunch of questions about the text. And the ways in which they respond to those questions are our reporting on how well they're reading, regardless of any of the other contexts that are involved in that, right? Because it's a measurable test. I can see whether or not you did this thing. I can see whether or not you remember this thing. And it reduces the idea of being a reader to, can you remember 6 words from the thing you just read? Which is not the same thing as being a good reader, I would argue, unless you think that's what it is, in which case I can't argue with you. That's fine if that's your belief. But that's the problem, right? We study very small pieces of it, but those don't. So some kids are just good at remembering the 6 words from the thing and are able to put it in. Doesn't make them good readers. And some kids are just bad at doing that. because they second guess themselves or whatever else. Doesn't mean they could just be bad test takers. But at the individual level, it's really bad for kids because they're getting judged. They're neither getting rewarded nor receiving formative feedback for the thing that's about them. It's against the test, which has been approved through some research process that says that, kids will remember 0.5% more words if they do it this way.
I think this, I encourage you to have an addendum on the research section you covered, because I think it's really potentially, especially tying it, like, I'm sorry, I said I wasn't going to talk about AI, but if we're going to be building these AI systems to teach people, and our research base is, you pointed out a really, I think, important critique of our research and our evidence-based practices. And do they sufficiently contemplate all this complexity that we've been talking about? So I will leave that for the addendum.
It's kind of what we're doing in the conference this summer. There's some
please
people who are
plug.
coming in.
What
let's
conference?
plug it. Let's plug it for the next 10 minutes, because let's talk about
I have one question, but
Oh,
please
sorry,
plug.
no, plug away, and then just question.
So ShrugCon, it is a conference about uncertainty and about uncertainty in education, but taking that uncertainty neither necessarily as a good thing or a bad thing, but rather as the thing that it is. So as related to this conversation, we may not know what a good reader is, but that doesn't mean we don't try to help people read. So rather than defining, clearly directing the path, mastery education, sort of allow that sort of space for that development. And most importantly, for the stuff that I'm talking about and the group who are talking about the stuff I'm talking about at the conference, allowing people to still make decisions when there aren't right answers. So dealing with uncertainty as it applies in the world. But
Can you
there's
tell us a little
stuff
bit about what's going to happen? Is it face-to-face? Is it online?
So it's 2 weeks.
Are you
It's
not
2 days
sure
online.
because it's an uncertainty conference?
There's 2 days online, the 16th and 17th of July, and then there's 2 days out of an after party after, where we're going to take all the stuff that was pulled together online and then put it into some kind of format that we can sort of report out with afterwards. There are going to be 5 to 10 minute sessions, speaking pieces that people are going to do, maybe 2 sets of those, depending on how things work out, and then a facilitated discussion after. So imagine Jeff standing up and going, I think we can confront all of this uncertainty with AI. It'll be great. Don't worry about it. And then you'd have a facilitated discussion after, where a totally fair and balanced person like me would go, let's hear every side of this except Jeff's. And then we would go through a discussion. So and then the discussions are really meant to be generative. So I'm imagining sort of like a shared Google Doc where, I'm not imagining, we'll do a shared Google Doc or slides. I can't decide which one I like better. Slides gives people out of people's messes a little bit better. Like Google Slides, you're a little bit more like you can take your own space. But the docs
I really
a little
want
easier.
tabbed docs. I really want tabbed docs. Like Sheets has tabs.
Yeah,
I love
yeah,
docs
yeah.
that did that. Anyway,
Yeah.
go ahead.
Well, Jamboard did kind of something like that.
Sounds awesome, Dave. How can
Okay.
people participate, and how much does it cost?
It's free.
And
Free?
who's we?
I know. What's that?
Who's we? You keep saying we.
Me and some pals. So
Okay.
this comes out of a group at the university, work preparedness learning people actually, who are talking in law and in social work, who are talking about their students getting ready for uncertainty whenever they go out and meet clients. And that's part of where this work started inside the institution, and some of the people in my office, and then a group of other people who I've been having this discussion with on and off for a couple of years now. We're all like, we should all get together and have this conversation together. It's as much about pulling together, like, so we're building an annotated bibliography at the same time as we're doing this. But also hopefully pulling together some of the different perspectives that people have on this, so that if other people are interested in looking at uncertainty, they have a place to start.
And it's not just educators, right? It's like all kinds of disciplines, right?
It's not just educators, though it probably will mostly end up being educators, because that's the community that I have.
And I shouldn't have said that, right? It's not necessarily focused on education, right?
No. So like one of my favorite conversations, and I went to a conference about this a couple of years ago, and she's coming, Olga, is in architecture. So it's a big thing in architecture right now, where you're trying to figure out how to confront building new buildings without new materials, and how a city has to integrate so that when you're taking something down, it becomes part of something that goes up, and just how all of this gets organized. And there's this whole sort of uncertainty principles that attach to that comes out of the wicked problem stuff from the 70s. So there's a whole field there just in there, and it's same with the medicine stuff from these guys. And so there's all kinds of different people. Josephine Sciolini, who's head of Science Canada Research Journals, is talking about uncertainty in journal publication and just how all the different pieces coming together now lead to so much more uncertainty than we used to have inside of those fields. So lots of different kinds of chats.
Sounds like lots of folks doing different design type things in different disciplines.
Yeah.
And that kind of segues to my final question.
Oof, well done.
Most of this chapter was a cerebral academic journey through the history of learning with charming anecdotes about, pasta assessment and Sumerian phonics and whatnot. And then I was struck by the last page or two.
Fascinating.
The last page or two got pretty dire, talking about consequences for society and is there hope in this world of pain and whatever. And then the final paragraph you say, but we do have a fighting chance. So can you talk, and I feel like there's this underlying thread to the book so far that, okay, we're talking about learning, but we're really talking about the well-being of society. Please address that.
Yes. Was that not enough?
That's the right answer.
Oh, that's a good TikTok. There's your soundbite right
So,
there.
yeah, I totally think that that's exactly what this is about. So for me, I care a lot more about people being good citizens than I care about them being good at math. I care a lot more about people making better decisions whenever they face things they don't understand, rather than hate-filled or fear-filled or whatever else decisions when they hit those spaces. I think the more we practice with these things inside of the one place where we're meant to learn how to learn, the more that is going to replicate itself out in the world. So I've done a lot of training programs with particularly 20, 21-year-olds. And it takes me, and I'm sure other people do it faster, but it takes me 3 months to get them to the point where they're actually able to face an uncertain situation without just wandering around looking for the right answer. I think of it as workforce preparation. I also think of it as life preparation. But it's really about breaking down the habits that you guys were talking about earlier when you're saying, we bounce all that creativity and that curiosity out of people. And it's that sense of curiosity and no, again, and it's actually in this chapter. Creativity is super annoying in the classroom. I understand why people don't want it. It's unpredictable and it is hard to manage, and sometimes it can be really troubling. But it's the way that we end up doing a good job in our lives, maybe. Yeah, so for me, it's always about citizenship, Jeff. Education's always about citizenship.
And there is hope. We have a fighting chance.
A fighting chance. Come back next week.
All right. If you want to have a little hope, come back whenever we have our next one. Stay tuned to the post show for information about that. Any closing words from anyone else?
Oh, come on, John. There's been so few words from you today.
There have been few words from me. I don't have anything to add.
All right.
I should have read this chapter.
I'm sure you did about 10
I'm
times.
sure you did
10 times, yeah.
Well, there is no test, but tune in next week to find out how we do stand a fighting chance in this crazy world that is 2024. See you then.
So tell me about Omni.
I truly encourage you to download the ChatGPT app if you haven't already. Click the little headphones app, choose your voice. It's interesting. Most men choose women, most women choose men.
Really?
And just use it instead of Google. Use it if you're pissed at your partner. Use it for whatever you want to talk about. Tell it to be brief if you want. Limit your answers to 2 or 3 sentences because it can get kind of chatty. And it's certainly a step up in realistic conversational engagement. I have my students talking to it, and of course there's a transcript. And please give me language feedback.
Is Scarlett Johansson one of the voices?
She was. Sky was the voice that was very similar to her. And she sued, and so they've made some modifications, and they made it less flirty. Did you see the Daily Show clip?
No.
I didn't. Can I also just point out that not only is Jennifer, Dr. Jennifer, ridiculously well prepared, but she also let slip in that conversation that in addition to the notes that she shared with us that are longer than the chapter itself, she has a separate set of notes
I
that
do
are
have
just
a
for her.
separate section of notes. I do. I do have separate notes. Someday I'll delve into those. No, there's not that. It's not that deep. But yeah, I do have some commentaries that I didn't cover.
I really appreciate all of the work that you're putting into this, Jennifer.
Oh, well, you did
I
all
do
of it.
too.
Wouldn't be here, sounds like, without your work, John.
No,
Where are your notes? You should be grabbing your notes from back in the day.
no, because all of my notes have been marked as resolved, whether they were or not.
You're not doing this again, Dave. No, you just can't. You can't. You can't do this. They're
It's your
mostly
book. You don't have to say I think. We know you think. It's your
Oh.
book. Yeah. We're at a much deeper level in this conversation than I was in any comments.
not always.
Although I'm realizing now that I don't recognize chapters by their titles because the titles came much later. It was just, chapter, and it wasn't even chapter 4 probably for most of the time.
No, because
right?
the
So,
introduction was actually chapter 1.
right.
I sent it
So
in and they changed it.
I don't know, chapter numbers or titles. It's just like, oh yeah, that's the one where he talks about playing soccer.
I've
Or
never
that's the one where he
adapted.
talks about the Senate.
I've never adapted to the new chapter numbers. It still confuses me.
I was just realizing in this chapter, the footer on each page differs from the actual title of the chapter.
That's it?
The what?
On every page in the footer.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this is at least partially an education problem, is what is at the bottom, but I think the title of the chapter.
No, you're thinking of the
Oh
old
no,
title of the chapter.
I'm on the next one.
No, that's the old title of the chapter. It used to be at least a learning problem. I got to change at the last minute.
So we have 3 chapters left. Are we going to sprint and finish this before John hits the road? Or
How I don't even.
That's up
unless
to
we're doing the
Jennifer.
index, we could also do the index.
How much are we covering with chapter if we do chapter 5 and 6 next week? Is that or
I think we
gonna
can do
be-
that. Let's do that.
Let's do 5 and 6 and then
5
we'll
and
do
6, and then we can fight about chapter 7 as the
Yes, because 7 is
Yeah, 7 needs to be its own.
it does need that's the one that I was shocked that Dave wrote. Prescriptive practices, like with numbers and everything.
I know, right? Crazy.
It is crazy. Yeah, that can definitely be. Oh yeah.
Yeah, let's do 5 and 6, and then we can do 7, and
Okay.
then we can get it in.
Yeah.
This time next week?
Works for me.
Should be okay.
Yes.
Should
Very
be
good.
okay. Let me just check. Wow, everybody gets to the calendars a lot faster than I do.
Is anyone doing Otessa, by the way? Are you the conference?
It just went online. So no, Bonnie is on the board or whatever.
Is
So I wasn't gonna be there because she was going.
I'm not. I'm doing the virtual one. It's that.
I'm sorry, what is this?
Otessa.
Otessa. Dave would know. It's very Canadian.
It is very Canadian.
But there's been outreach now to the southern neighbors. More, it feels like it. Feels like more outreach because I've heard about it enough to submit a proposal.
Open Technology and
Technology and
Education
Education
Society
Society.
and Scholarship Association.
Mm-hmm. It's been around for, is it pushing a decade? It's gotta be close, isn't it?
It's been a few years. I should know, but I don't.
And it seems like it found a home that maybe it didn't have originally. Like, right? Is that true? It seemed like it was more homegrown, and now it. Well, Bonnie, we should have Bonnie here telling the story.
Well, it latched onto Congress.
Yeah, I don't know what that means, but I had to pay
So
them.
Congress is the
I had to
big
pay them a fee.
conference in Canada for academics.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I had to pay them a fee, and then I had to pay. It's still pretty reasonable. I think it was under 500 US, something like that.
Do you go to conferences a lot?
I used to go to a ton, but not since the pandemic, really. Oh. Do you guys go at all?
Rarely. I get to maybe one a year, and it's usually a local.
I was going to like one a month, it felt like during the school year for a while. When I was trying to get designers for learning, I was trying to meet and mingle and
Sure.
those types of things.
I went to the
Yeah, I don't-
Graduate Education Research Conference this year.
What's that? I don't know
It's
what
a
that is.
day of school.
Oh.
By going to the conference, I got my employer to pay for me to go to Windsor.
Oh.
Yeah.
Jeff, do you ever come back to the US for any reason?
Sure. I was back last winter, like a year and a half, like a year and a half ago, and we're actually going to pass through the summer. We're doing a lap around the planet. We're doing London, Scotland,
Ooh.
Ireland, New York, New Hampshire, and back.
Cool.
Sure.
Skipping all of us, right from New Hampshire
Yeah.
straight back.
Where are you going in Scotland?
We'll be staying in Glasgow
Okay,
during the Edinburgh Festival, so we'll certainly pop over to Edinburgh.
cool.
Taylor Swift.
Bonnie's got 7 weeks in Scotland in the next year. Over the
7
next-
weeks.
Yeah.
What
Her,
gigs she got there?
her sabbatical starts on the 1st of July.